About 15 years ago, my wife, who was then my fiance, and I were in the process of putting together a list of people to invite to our wedding. There were the obvious choices, close family and friends. There were those we wanted to invite that we knew probably couldn't make it to the wedding, but we'd invite anyway. And of course, there were the people we were obligated to send invitations to, who I won't name because, well, because. It was in many ways a balancing act. We knew the size of our venue. We knew our budget for the wedding. We knew who we wanted in our corner as we began our life together. And to be fair, because we were broke college students working multiple part-time jobs, we were mostly constrained by budget. We specifically chose the time of day that our wedding would take place to avoid meal hours. Yes, we were cheap, but we were also practical. While I think our wedding was a beautiful event, aside from the cake and a handful of snacks, it was not by any means a banquet. In either case, the invitation aspect is the most important part. We had to decide who to invite, and we saw inviting someone as a statement of our relationship with them. In Luke 14, Jesus offers a parable about a great banquet. Of course, you could look at the chapter and label several things as banquet parables. Looking at lists of parables, I see people say that verse 8 through 11 constitute a parable, then verses 12 through 14 are another parable, and finally a third parable in 16 through 24. I think they're all connected, but I think the only one that is really a parable is the one that starts in verse 16, where Jesus says, "A man gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, his servants were sent out to those who had been invited, saying, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame.' And the servant said, 'What you commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.'" Leading up to this parable are the other passages that I think get labeled as parables that are simply Jesus teaching about not prioritizing the wealthy or presuming our own importance is greater than it actually is. And Jesus tells his followers not to claim a seat of honor at a banquet they've been invited to. Because if they do, it may be taken from them and given to someone else who was expected to sit there, which would be humiliating for them, but also show their own presumptuousness. Then he tells them not to fill their banquets with people who are able to repay them for the invitation. Don't invite your rich friends or neighbors, Jesus says. Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. You'll be repaid at the resurrection. This theme of the banquet is one I think we should pay special attention to today. We are invited to the banquet that is the kingdom of heaven. Some of us may feel like we already belong there, and there will always be another invitation, we tell ourselves. And maybe it's better for us to reject the invitation now and then show up anyway. Who needs that kind of commitment? If I change my mind, it's not like the host is going to keep me out, right? Well, the banquet master sees it differently. This banquet is for those who will appreciate it. And the invitation is either accepted or lost. It's either seen as an honor or not. And the significance of receiving the invitation has nothing to do with status, but with the love that the master has for the invitee. Maybe you are not like the group that rejected the invitation, though. Maybe you're in the second group, the poor or marginalized. You figured that the invitation was only for those with status. You've known of the banquet because you're part of the community the master lives in, and you're familiar with his plans, but you figured you were not worth his consideration. Maybe you're worried about the condition of your life being unfit for the banquet. That's clearly not a concern for the host. His desire is to celebrate with those who would accept the invitation. And he's invited you. He's not ashamed of you. You have a place at the table. You belong at the master's banquet. He's not picky about who he invites. In fact, by the end of the parable, he's invited everyone. It's only those who reject the invitation that will find no room at the table. I love you, and I pray that you would accept the invitation to the feast. Don't think of yourself too highly to accept the invitation, but don't think of yourself too lowly to join in the celebration.